be a solid unit, so the forces pass through, and you see on that Newton's cradle. So as Dr. Bales talked about, this would seem like a good idea, and we want to look at, is there any existing data that can help us look at this? And this is where we, Dr. Smith particularly, looked at the head ramming sheep, and as we go to higher altitudes, there's less oxygen there, so there's more CO2 in the oxygen we're breathing, and so the brain senses it needs more oxygen, it naturally pulls more blood, so we have cerebral edema when we go to altitude. And so we looked at this and we said, well, if that's the case, wouldn't there be less concussions at higher altitude? And again, we see the migration pattern of the head ramming sheep, they follow high altitudes where they're doing the hitting. So I called my colleague and friend Don Comstock, who maintains the largest database in the country, the RIO database, and I asked her, I said, can we look at some of your data to see whether there's reduced concussions at higher altitude? So she said, sure. We pulled that data, had 20 million athletic exposures, nearly 6,000 concussion. Again, keep in mind, this was not a collared, this is just a normal epidemiology study, so surveillance, we did not have collars on these athletes. But at those high schools that played at their football games and soccer games at higher altitude, we saw about a 30% reduction in those sports. We thought that was an interesting finding, but we also know there's a lot of variation in sports and how it's played. So we wanted to look at the NFL, because the NFL provides a very precise altitude for every game, and we know every concussion that's occurring. So we did that study, followed up for 2 years, and what we found is a very similar rate, about a 32% reduction in those games played at the higher altitude stadiums. So we were excited about this, very preliminary data, but we have to now move on to some of the preclinical studies to see, is this effective? And Dr. Bales has already done a lot of work in this area in his laboratory. They looked at this precursor of axonal injury, so brain injury, the structure. And what they found, which was really amazing, with two separate studies, basically an 83% reduction of axonal injury, then another 60% reduction in another biomarker of brain injury. So that was important data to build upon. And I think this slide speaks for itself. Whenever he described when they were putting a high impact injury situation, the collar seems to actually have some protective effects. So that's a really interesting picture to move forward with. It seems positive. So at Cincinnati Children's, we're really interested in the safety of our children, and can this be used safely to protect? We care about whether it works, but most importantly, we want to know if it's safe. So we focus a lot of our early research to see, is this a safe device to wear? We've done a lot of clinical trials looking at both the biomechanics of high running, jumping, landing, postural stability. We've looked at blood work, we've done urinalysis, we've had the young kids run to maximum exertion to see how their cardiorespiratory system responds. And we haven't had any negative responses. We've also looked at higher level cognition, hearing, and vision. We've done a lot of testing at children to see, is this safe? And we have not to date had any negative effects in these areas. We've also looked a little bit to see, is the brain responding as we think it should respond? And this is some MRI images. It's called, using a technology called venography.